What is up, everybody, and welcome to Money Legos, a podcast about global commerce and the builders making it a reality. I'm Greg Brandard, and I'm excited to bring you this conversation with Cristina Ciaravalli. Cristina leads new business and partnerships at Unit and is the head of community at This Week in Fintech, which is probably the largest fintech community in the world. Before Unit, she helped build out the go-to-market team at Plaid and held positions at BlackRock and Goldman Sachs. Cristina has been named an Inspiring Fintech Female by NYC Fintech Women in both 2020 and 2022. Cristina, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. It's really good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So This Week in Fintech, it is probably the largest fintech community in the world. There are 80,000 subscribers and community members. There are in-person events, a Slack group, multiple podcasts, multiple newsletters, a job board, international treks. How did This Week in Fintech all come about?
Yeah, great question. So I give all credit to Nick Milanovic, our founder, who, as you probably know, at Google, there's 80-20 projects. So this was his 20. He started writing the newsletter and I started reading it when I joined Plaid in 2019. It was honestly a part of onboarding. Like the induction to fintech was you have to read Nick Milanovic's newsletter, which is This Week in Fintech. At the time, it was really like headline aggregation. So what is actually going on, linking out to all these different pieces of news, and then feeling caught up with fintech specifically, because no one was really doing that at the time. I mean, fintech as a term, I think, was still relatively new then.
What year was this when it started?
Well, when I started reading, it was early 2019, but I want to say he started it in 2018.
Cool.
Maybe even a year prior. I can check those facts. So I think Nick has been doing the This Week in Fintech newsletter portion for years as part of his 20% project while he was at Google Pay. I started reading it when I joined Plaid in 2019, and then Nick decided to see if his readers would want to get together for like a small happy hour in New York where he lived. So I think the first happy hour had 50 people show up, and he was like, wow, I'm so surprised. Fintech people want to meet each other. This is cool. And this was kind of also when we were coming out of COVID. So I just think an in-person interaction in general was very appetizing. Then he did another one, and I want to say 100 people showed up. And then he did another one where he had room for 200. This is the one where I came. And 400 people showed up. So on my way in, I ran into a good friend from college whose brother happened to be Nick's good friend from college. So we both had brother and sister friends who introduced us at this event. And I couldn't even get in to the event. So Nick is like apologizing to me. He's saying we're all going around to an Irish pub around the corner. And I was like, okay, something is going on here. Like, this is really crazy that this many fintech nerds, and I like rolled deep with all my Plaid friends, and we were all excited to like meet people and have free drinks, of course. And we get sent around the corner to the Irish pub. And so I wasn't surprised to see that in the newsletter he sent out like the following Monday, he was looking for help in planning the next bunch of community gatherings. So, I responded. I had met him in person again through our mutual friends. And I said, hey, Nick, like I'm the unofficial Plaid sales social chair. I've been maid of honor twice. Like if you need someone to help you throw a happy hour, like I'm happy to help. So he literally writes back, you're hired. And I was like, nice. Oh, okay. Like, you don't want to see my resume to interview? He's like, nope, exactly what you described is exactly what I need. He's like, listen, it's not a paid position. But if you can volunteer like 2 hours of your time a week, I'm happy to help facilitate any intros to companies that like, you want to talk to about Plaid or anything like that. And I was like, cool, like that sounds great. No need to pay me. I'm just excited to like be back out in New York. And I was living in San Francisco for 5 years prior. So I'm just stoked to like get deep into the fintech scene in Manhattan. So one thing leads to another, and Nick has this great idea to throw a black tie fintech charity gala in December. We end up partnering up on that. We throw this amazing event at the Boathouse in Central Park. That has now become, our annual tradition. So we're gearing up for our third one, which is in less than a month. And the community has just sort of exploded since then. And I've been able to build out a team, and here we are.
That's amazing. So it was 50 people at the first event and then 400 at the next. Why do you think that was? Do you think there was just a lack of community in fintech? A lot of people were in it, working in it. It was in the zeitgeist, but there was no place for people to gather.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think it was also, you have to remember, 2020 was such an explosive year of growth in fintech. But unless you were, calling up a friend like, hey, Greg, let's jump on a call and chat about what's going on, it was kind of hard to keep your ear to the ground. So I think people knew that like the This Week in Fintech newsletter was a great source of headlines, but everything that's in print is not the full picture. And so I think there was this appetite to go, IRL, as the Gen Zers say, or to go into the wild and meet people in your space and talk to them and have an honest, candid conversation about what you're seeing and what you're hearing. So I think that paired with, the vaccine came out in early 2021. We started doing our events in mid to late 2021. So it was like that craving of in-person interaction, along with who's having off-the-record fintech conversations now that it's COVID. Nobody was, so we're ready for that again. Like, let's bring that back.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And then I guess it was building on the foundation of the newsletter. And so it had some brand recognition. You were reading it in your onboarding at Plaid. And so folks knew what it was. And so once it was put out there that there were these meetups happening, then the lid came off.
Yeah, exactly. I think we had a very captive audience. And, our happy hours, especially to start, were not geared towards everybody. Like, they were typically very crowded and very loud and very, like, if you're an extrovert or in sales or a venture capitalist, you're probably going to love it because there's a ton of founders there. But if you're more introverted or wanted a more small, intimate dinner, like, probably not your scene. So I think we've also learned from that. And as our community has grown, our event types have shifted and changed. So we've done everything from intimate private room dinners with, 15 CTOs. And we've done humongous, like, I think we had 550 people at our New York Tech Week happy hour earlier this year. So we run the gamut, dinners, happy hours, coffees, fitness classes. We've done Soul Cycle partnerships, all the way to our Money 2020 kickoff party, which is also huge. We had 1,400 people RSVP just last month. So,
epic.
Yeah, so there's, and thank you for coming to that. So there's, really nothing. I mean, Nick and I both kind of feel that there's nothing we can't do. If we have the people in the community that want to work out together, have coffee together, have dinner together, have happy hour together, then why not?
Yeah, that's really interesting because one of the questions of community building is where do you focus and where do you spend time? And do you do the blowout happy hours that are 500 people or 1,400 in the case of Money 2020? Do you focus a lot of your time and resources there? Do you focus on the private dinners that are 12 people and are 3 hours long and you get to put a name to a face with every single person there? And then there's live events, there's podcasts, et cetera. And there isn't a huge team behind This Week in Fintech. So how do you think about the trade-offs in where you spend your energy through each of those different event types?
It's a great question. And candidly, Greg, it's something that I'm still, working on.
There's no magic answer.
There is no magic answer, but that's the honest truth. I think one of the values that I wrote down when planning out my vision for community, and this is now, we're wrapping up my third year at This Week in Fintech, was inclusivity. I really wanted to feel like anyone, whether they were, a certain anything, and that means, yes, gender and race, but also like role at a company, level at a company, part of the country, not in our country, introvert, extrovert, like really thinking about all the types of people. I mean, 80,000 is a lot. Could they feel at home at one of our events? And like that has definitely been a North Star for me, is making sure that they're not all alcoholic focused, making sure that they're not all athletic focused, because we know that that precludes certain people. So I think a part of it is figuring out the right balance. And obviously when you have a 500 person happy hour, in general, more people can show versus a 15-person dinner, but it's kind of picking and choosing your spots, right? And a lot of that is also based on our sponsors. We're lucky to have incredible repeat sponsors, and some have signed up for strategic partnerships where they'll say, hey, for 2023, this is our marketing budget that we can allocate to This Week in Fintech, or TWIF as we call shorthand. And we want to map out like a true, events marketing roadmap with you all that includes ads in the newsletter, podcast sponsorships, events that are big and events that are small. And we love that because then you're kind of able to accomplish different goals. We can tie it back to their KPIs. So we're all about like mixing it up, and we never want TWIF to get stale. We always like to keep it fresh. That's why like our formal venue is different each year. So that's an important thing for us. And as we grow the team, I think we'll only get better at it. But ways to go for sure.
I definitely want to chat more about the sponsorships and bringing on those ideal partners where there's a mutually beneficial relationship. Just before we get to that, one of the things that's interesting about TWIF is you go to one of these events and you meet top names in fintech, and the quality of people that are there is really astounding. And I think it's a testament to the brand that This Week in Fintech has built. What do you think, what goes into building and maintaining a brand like that within fintech? It is a crowded space. There are other fintech meetups. How do you punch through the noise and maintain a brand with others in the community and event building space?
It's something we're constantly thinking about, making sure we don't lose sight of. One, I think, advantage that we have, Greg, candidly, is, we're not really selling anything, right? So you don't feel, if you're, for example, going to, I'll use my employers, a Plaid event, are they going to try to sell me aggregation? Or if I go to a unit event, are they going to try to sell me on their BaaS platform? We are kind of this neutral player because we're really just trying to bring news and interesting insights and, more transparency and a bit more exposure of what's going on in fintech to the community. But we're not pushing an agenda. We're really not. So I think that creates this safety and this element of a safe space for people to come gather that people like. So I think that's probably a big component of it. I think the second thing is you have to differentiate your events, you have to. And whether that's having them, be at really interesting venues, and interesting could mean a neighborhood you typically don't gather a lot of people in, or a restaurant that has incredible food and that no one can get into unless there's a private room reserved, right? Those kinds of things I think keep people excited to come join us. We're not just doing it at the same place at the same time every single event. But also I do think it's the caliber of the community, and we're very fortunate. There's so many of us on the team that have worked hard to build networks with folks in our spaces, and that can be deeper as in, crypto, or deeper as in, Nick was on the more enterprise side being at Google, or, me being more of the startup space. So I think we've all just formed true actual relationships with these folks, and then they want to see their friends. We're all actually friends, Alex got married this year, invited me to his wedding. I'm going to Nick's wedding next year. We're all actually friends. So I think that helps.
Yeah. So there's so much that goes into an event, bringing together people. You have to coordinate a venue, you have to do marketing and communication, you have to send out invites, you have to secure the budget and sponsors. So much work goes into pulling off a seamless event. And I think you mentioned you did 57 or something like that this year or last year, which is just an astounding number of events. It's more than one a week. I guess my question is, what is it about events and more generally community building that keeps you engaged? And what do you get out of it? And how do you stay motivated to do all this work that goes on behind the scenes?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, it's not just me. So I want to be very clear about that. I did not single-handedly throw 57 events last year. It was a big team effort. And you're right, a lot goes into it. And I think we've hired really well for spikes, for people that are extremely skilled in, making a beautiful Luma graphic, which is the invitation page and the landing page we use for registration. Yeah. People that can really negotiate, one of my former sales colleagues from Plaid, and she's incredible at getting the venue down on price and to a number that works with our sponsor budget. We have operational whizzes. We have others that are building community elsewhere that are helping. So it's truly just a very well-rounded team. And then we also have our editors that are in places like Africa and the UK, also throwing events to coincide with their readership growth in those regions. So it's a big team effort. I also think what keeps me going is you never know the kind of magic that's going to happen at one of these events. And when I say magic, I can truly mean everything from I helped introduce a friend at a KYC company to a large enterprise that I was trying to sell a unit to back at South by Southwest. And that large enterprise bought them, right? Wow. That's an insane outcome. And obviously that's an outlier, that's not happening at every TWIF event for sure. But that was so cool and something that you could never sort of imagine. Have I closed deals from relationships that have been fostered at TWIF events? 100%. The largest deal I closed at Plaid was a man that I sat next to at a This Week in Fintech dinner 2 years prior to that deal closing. And I just kind of said, hey, when you need Plaid, call me. I'll be here. And he did, you know? So I think what's in it for me is really just a combination of like the unknown and knowing that really anything can happen when you're out in the wild and you're doing the face-to-face networking and community building. But also this community is small and there's always something that I'm happy to help others with. There's always help I need. And I feel like I have a place to go to ask for that, whether it's a recommendation for a product I want to buy or advice if I'm thinking about launching something or moving into a new region for us. So I just think it's a real nice symbiotic community and I love being a part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the most interesting things for me about, I've been involved in various communities, gone to a bunch of TWIF events. I've hosted some of my own communities. And it really, like for me, it boiled down to how much serendipity, exactly as you said, just comes out of bringing a bunch of cool people together. Literally, I just threw up on LinkedIn an event, a small event that I'm doing in next week here in San Francisco. And 4 people DM'd me on LinkedIn saying, oh, this is cool. By the way, you should talk to this person. Or I saw that and then I thought of this thing that you should check out. And so it's interesting that how powerful the serendipity can be through just, simple or very involved community building.
We try to make it look simple on the outside. That's the
exactly
goal,
Exactly. Cool. So you have worked with some of the largest names in fintech as partnerships and sponsors. Modern Treasury, SVB, Wells Fargo, FinTech Nexus, FinTech Meetup, to name a few. What goes into finding those partners and how do you get them on board to sponsor events and be a TWIF partner?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, let's talk about Money 2020, right? Everybody knows that Money 2020, particularly the one in Vegas, is the place to be if you're in fintech. And James and Remy, who are both on their team, are incredible supporters of the work we do at This Week in Fintech, because of course it's exactly the audience of people who will be, buying booths and buying hospitality suites in Vegas at Money 2020. And, we're always at their conferences, right? Like Nick, Alex, me, the whole team, we're always going to Money 2020. So I think that's a relationship, for example, that we've had for a very long time, where it's really easy to then kind of call up your friend and say hey, do you guys need to get on the map here or there? Are you guys looking to expand or announce or do something cool that we can be helpful with? And oftentimes the answer is yes. And so whether or not it can come inbound from them where they're like, hey, could we put something in the newsletter? We really want to get the word out. And we're like, sure, let's do it. Or they're like, hey, we're trying to host, a dinner series. I'm working with one of our partners right now. They want to do smaller, intimate dinners on a quarterly basis. And they're like, we don't really have a marketing budget. We don't really know where to begin. Can you help us? So a part of it is just having our friends know that they can call us and we'll be here to figure it out with them. And then part of it is the team really doing amazing outreach. Sometimes we'll have 1 or 2 sponsors, but to cover the cost of a big event, we need 3 or 4. And so that's when our team will go outbound, tap our network. We'll put advertisements in the newsletter, which again is 80,000 people. And that's how we've had some net new sponsorships show up where people say, oh, you want to do this event around X conference and you need X amount of dollars? That works for us. Yeah. And it's great because all they have to do is really just send in the check. We slap their logo on it. We announce it to the world and they get to show up and have an amazing event that looks like, they did all the work behind. And really it's our team in the background, making that happen. And, we're happy to be that extension of marketing for a lot of the companies, especially in a year like 2023 where budgets are being slashed. You need to do more with less.
Yeah.
So it's easy to say, okay, if you couldn't throw this, $50,000 event, but 5 of you could put in 10K, great. And then This Week in Fintech will take on the work.
How much harder is it in a market like today to find that budget versus, 2021, maybe even 2020, the latter half where that budget existed in a way that was much more prevalent?
It's very hard. I won't sugarcoat it. It's been hard.
Yeah.
And I think even earlier in the year, the FinTech Formal is not a cheap event, right? It's a black tie, 500-person charity gala in December where rates are all super high in Manhattan. So, we've had to have some frank conversations. Like, if we don't hustle and get the sponsors to help us throw this, then it might not happen, right? And that's just the sad reality of where budgets are and how inflation is, because an open bar used to be just like $75 a head, and now it's well over 100. So it's difficult to manage or to balance, I guess, both of those things. But I have to really give credit back to the team, like a true group of hustlers. We get super creative, and we'll kind of work with you. If you're the sponsor and you tell me these are my KPIs and these are the dollars I have to accomplish them, what can you do for me? Like, we'll kind of go down the brainstorming rabbit hole with you and say, what if we did this activation? What if we dropped swag? What if we did something else that we've maybe never done before, in order to make it worth your while? Because that's the other thing. Like, we really want to be, a long-term partner. It's very rare that we do one event and then we say, see you never, and we never partner again. Like, almost all of our sponsors are repeat sponsors. Which of course is because we're really trying to make them happy. We're trying to make it an ROI positive experience. So we're focused on that this year for sure.
So back when This Week in Fintech, when you were first doing your first events, and you were securing, trying to secure funding for the events that you were hosting, or maybe put another way, if someone else was starting their own community today, what advice would you give them in terms of finding sponsors or, putting their brand out there in terms of marketing and getting people involved in a community?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think there's two things I would recommend. One is start small. So like, we did not come out of the gates with a 500-person black tie charity gala, right?
Yeah.
Like, we built up to that, I think, over the course of about our first 6 months, which still was pretty aggressive. And like, Nick and I both were kind of throwing this thing together. Like, do we know if this is going to pan out? Like, can we pull this off? So one would be like, start small and scale. And I think you never want to overpromise and then underdeliver, right? It's much better to do the opposite. Mm-hmm. And then I think the second thing I would say is partner up with people that you already have a relationship with before you try to go out and build new relationships. And what I mean by that is I think about who our first sponsors were and who, we were either asking for money from or even accepting money from. And it was all, like founders that Nick or I were friends with, people that were close to the This Week in Fintech team. Because if you have that sort of inherent trust and you can be very transparent about costs of events and outcomes that the sponsor wants, it goes so much more smoothly. And then you now have that proof point that you can say, hey, here's like a relevant, almost customer story that you can tell to the cold call that you make for the next sponsor who doesn't know me, who doesn't know Nick, who doesn't know This Week in Fintech as well, but can say, oh, wow, look what she did there. I want her to do that for me. So it's really like a start small, work with who you know at first, and then once you have that proof, that'll sell itself.
Yeah. You mentioned inclusivity, I think, as one of the values that you set out for this year. Are there any other values or missions that folks have around the table at This Week in Fintech, or anything else that comes to mind when you think about the mission of the community?
Yeah, there are many. I think inclusivity is really important. I think, radical candor is something that we practice internally as a team. I always ask my reports if they have feedback for me. I always want them to feel like this community and working on this community is a good use of their time, but that it also helps pay it forward to their other full-time jobs in some way. And if not, I'm always like, call me out, hold me accountable. I want it to be, a only positive experience for you. And, we're building this ship as we sail it, right? So there's so many things that we know are, maybe worked in 2022 and that we're thinking about completely overhauling for 2024. So I think that would be another value we have, which is really just constant iteration, always being futuristic, making sure that we're keeping up with the changes that are happening. I mean, not only in fintech, but macroeconomic, across the world, really. And then also to have fun, right? We know all of us have other full-time jobs. We know that this is an incredible side hustle to have, but at the end of the day, like, we understand priorities, and your day job has to come first. I never want someone to feel like they need to sacrifice, I always joke, like, I've got my W-2 and then I've got my 1099, right? And it's a balance for sure to have two jobs that you love both of them. But I think that's another value, is like, we draw boundaries and we respect boundaries, and we ask everyone on the team to kind of do the same.
It's interesting because community management is oftentimes a side hustle. It's oftentimes not what you're doing full time. You have a full-time job, and this is something you do in your part-time that you do out of the love of the game, or maybe there's some sort of like 1099 economics that you get out of it. But for a lot of people, it's really just because they like it and they want to bring together cool people. How do folks on your team or you personally manage having a full-time job that keeps you super busy? There's a lot of travel involved, I know, for you personally. How do you manage both and still find the energy to do both?
That's a great question. I mean, I'll say this too. My first year, 2021, it was solely volunteer. And I think that spirit of like, would you do this anyway if you didn't get paid, is something that like we've kind of held across the team, right? Like, we're not yes, like, we're now all being compensated for the work that we're doing, but it's by no means like life-changing money that's, going to become a full-time salary, at least now, maybe sometime in the future, but not now. So I think part of it is like, do you have a passion for whatever you're doing? The writing, the podcasting, the community gathering, it can be any of those things, but these are all really just passions that people had on the side. And now they're sort of saying, well, if This Week in Fintech is a stage where I can help amplify this passion that I already had, or maybe was already writing. Des Fleming is a great example. Investor at First Mark Capital, was writing in his free time. And I think Nick actually reached out to him and said, hey man, I love what you're writing. Do you want to come share it with 80,000 people? Like, of course he's going to say yes, So I think part of it is building a team of people that are already enjoying their exact roles. And then second, you asked how I stay energized. I have to say, like, this stuff does energize me. If I was doing this work, planning these events, bringing people together, responding in the Slack, and it drained me, I would not be doing it. But I genuinely, I am so excited for the FinTech Formal we have coming up. The Money 2020 event was so much fun. I felt like I got to see my SF and my Austin and my New York and my Miami and my Denver and my London folks all in one place, which is really cool because we've thrown events in all those cities and more, and it's rare they're all in one room. And then getting to introduce them to each other is energizing, because I love to, again, to have magic happen for you is great, but it's also so fun to watch it happen for your friends and your colleagues, and to introduce other great people like you were talking about. So I find it really enjoyable. I can't imagine not doing This Week in Fintech.
Yeah, it's cool. What makes a great community? It's probably elements of all of what we've talked about so far. People who get energized by meeting other people and hosting great events, building relationships. But, maybe in your mind, what do you think makes a great community, or what are the aspects about This Week in Fintech that you like the most?
Yeah, I think something that I learned from a young age, attending whatever kind of professional event it was, a panel, a fireside, a networking event, is you truly get out of it what you put into it. And I think we're very fortunate at This Week in Fintech to have a very large majority of our community put a lot into it. I mean, we're really fortunate to have everyone from, the general partners at Better Tomorrow Ventures, answering questions in our WhatsApp group, to folks that are new to the space and that just want to get, an opinion or a response or a clarification on something, to I am in, a subgroup with all women in fintech. And I genuinely feel like anything I put in there, any question someone has, any ask or, help, truly help that people need, someone is there to lend a helping hand. And so I think that is what has made This Week in Fintech an extremely powerful community, because it's a safe space where people can go and ask for help and they know they'll get it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. And it's difficult to achieve, to be honest, especially in an online format. I'm in so many Slack groups and WhatsApp groups that get a little bit of traction and then just kind of die off. How do you keep people engaged in This Week in Fintech digitally?
It's a great question, and something that I think we're still looking to expand. You know, our in-person community is larger than the Slack community, and we're trying to get it to catch up. I think it's pairing the two together. Sophie and our team threw an incredible job fair earlier this year, and she had everyone in the Slack get broken out into different channels to help those employers find, you know, the right candidates for roles.
Cool.
So that's another, you know, great way to basically drum up involvement and make the Slack relevant. I really think as long as everything that you're doing is either, you know, people helping people, us helping people, or just extremely relevant content. Like, again, going back to our roots, which was just like, I want all the headlines in fintech, but I don't have time to aggregate them. Like, don't worry, we got you. It's going to make people feel invested, and that's what is going to keep them returning and coming back for more.
One of the other cool aspects of This Week in Fintech is how it's global by nature. So it's not just US focused, you know, where we're based, but there are also contributors in various other countries. I think you said six continents This Week in Fintech now covers. You know, what was the inspiration behind going global, and how have you managed that sort of expansion in scope? Because, you know, one could argue there's enough to do, like literally in the US or North America, but there's obviously so much more out there. So how do you how did you approach kind of taking that on?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick is a very humble guy, and I think he realized pretty early on that if he was just getting the full picture in the US, like, that's not the full picture, right? And so we were actually very deliberate when we rebranded. We were going to make our tagline, you know, This Week in Fintech, the front page of fintech, and we inserted the word global in there. So we're now This Week in Fintech, the front page of global fintech, because we know that there's so much more than what's just going on here in the US. And we wanted, going back to our inclusivity value, like, we wanted to make sure we encompassed everything. So I think part of it was finding folks, you know, like Michael Jenkins, who's our UK writer, to feel like they had a place at This Week in Fintech, even if, you know, they were across the pond. And now, like, this whole team of international writers in particular, I think love that they all have the expertise or, you know, the knowledge within their own country, continent, but that they can share that, and we can sort of help cross-pollinate and cross-educate everyone in the community. And when you sign up, you get to select the regions that are most interesting to you. So it's great. If you're an investor in the US, but you care about LATAM fintech, well, go ahead and like select LATAM and you can get that newsletter. And if, you know, Europe is outside your domain, so that's not a relevant newsletter to you, like, that's okay. You know, we'll pick and choose our spots. So I think that's something that we really focus on. And Nick believing that the writer should be in the region, I think, is another extremely important thing. It goes back to what I said about having your ear to the ground. We can't do that in China. We can't do that in India. You know, we need someone there. And so because we now have folks in those regions, I think we feel like it strengthens our brand because we're like coming at you live from the source. And that just makes the quality of our writing and the quality of, you know, even the headlines that we're sharing higher.
It's really cool. And fintech, just by nature, is global. It encompasses every transaction. And so it's a cool ground to cover in a global fashion.
I agree.
So this has been an awesome conversation and too short, Cristina, but anything you would put in or mention as we wrap up?
No, I think I would just, you know, shout out to all the readers who are already subscribing to This Week in Fintech. Like, we really genuinely appreciate all of you, and we welcome your feedback at any time. And I would say if you haven't checked out the newsletter or come to one of our events, we really would love to see you in your city. And if we're not yet in your city, let me know. I'm happy to partner with you, you know, to launch in new cities. We've had some incredible new city expansions this year as well. So yeah, Cristina, no H, at thisweekinfintech.com.
And it's thisweekinfintech.com. And are the socials all This Week in Fintech or TWIF?
Yep, I think our Instagram is at This Week in Fintech, and our Twitter or our X is TWI Fintech.
Awesome. Well, Cristina, thanks so much. This has been awesome.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.